The home inspector is going to be looking at the surface grade directly adjacent to the building to make sure that there's sufficient grading for runoff of water. So we're going to be checking the doors to make sure they open and close, to make sure that there's no rubbing or sticking, and also the same situation for the windows to make sure that the windows open and close correctly. There's no broken windows. So we're going to be looking at the decks to see if there's any kind of loose railing, if there's any kind of trip hazard walking up and down the decks. The stairways also we're going to be checking to make sure that the rise and run is correct, and also if there's any kind of enclosure we're going to make sure that there's no kind of problem from the enclosure falling down. We're going to be taking a look at each wall, taking a look around the outside of the house to see if there's any kind of damage and to see if there's any kind of possibility for water intrusion. We're going to be looking at the trim to make sure that the trim is connected correctly to the windows and to see if any kind of caulking is needed or any kind of further repair or maintenance is needed. And we're just going to be looking down at our feet and making sure there's nothing we're going to trip over, make sure there's no kind of cracks or damage, and make sure that the water runoff is correctly on the walkways and the driveways. I'm also going to check the sprinklers to make sure they're working correctly and that they're not causing any kind of moisture damage on the house. Now we're going to check the water pressure. That looks good. Also, we're going to take a look at the grade to make sure that it slopes away from the house and there's no kind of drainage issues. As we walk around the outside of the house, we're going to take a look at the windows from the outside, make sure there's no broken glass or broken seals, making sure that there's no caulking needed and they're installed correctly. As I'm walking around the house, I'm taking a look at the stucco. In this case, I'm looking at the gutter and the drain to make sure that it's installed correctly. I'm taking a look at the front door, looking at everything externally, checking the windows, see if they're broken, checking again all the gutters, looking underneath the eaves to see if there's any kind of damage. In this case, there's a vent here, making sure that the vent is put in correctly and that there's no kind of holes for any kind of mice or birds to go in there. As I walk around the outside of the house, I'm going to be checking any of the electrical fixtures, making sure there's no exposed wiring. Sometimes people put an electrical cord in here for Christmas tree lights. I'm just going to make sure everything's done correctly. Be checking the eaves under here, make sure there's no damage I need to look at later when I'm in the attic. The garage door, I'm going to make sure it seals correctly here. Once again, keeping my eye out for any kind of stucco damage. Sometimes on wood houses on the outside, there's a gap above here that I need to check to make sure no water entry is happening there. Just doing a quick visual on the outside, making sure there's no damage to the driveway area. I continue walking around to look at the outside. I already checked the gate, checking to make sure the gutters look correct, checking this electrical light again. The door looks all correct. Checking around the outside of the door. In this case, it's stucco, looking for any kind of major cracking in the stucco. I'm checking underneath the eaves. There's venting here on this side that looks good. I'm also checking the concrete here, checking the drainage, how it drains away from the house. I'm going to walk around the outside and take a look at the fence. I'm going to take a look at the posts to make sure there's no loose or rotted posts, make sure there's no missing boards, and then I'll write in the inspection report the general condition of the fence. As I walk around, I'm going to be looking at the eaves, looking at the vents to make sure there's no kind of broken or missing vents, taking a look at the lamp out here, checking the sliding glass door to make sure it works correctly, looking around the outside of the door to make sure there's no kind of caulking issue, checking any water outlets. We have an electrical outlet here I'm going to be checking to make sure it works correctly and it's not loose. Doing a visual of the concrete, looking for the drainage also, taking a look at the windows, just basically walking around giving a good visual of everything.